Hey listeners, did you know that Consider Before Consuming is a podcast by Fight the New Drug? Fight the New Drug is a non-religious, non-legislative 501c3 nonprofit that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on the harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. Fight the New Drug is research-based, education-focused, sex-positive, and anti-shame. To learn more about Fight the New Drug and to see the additional free resources that we offer, like our 3-part documentary series and our interactive conversation guide, visit ftnd.org. That's ftnd.org.
My name is Garrett Johnson, and today's episode is with Alia. She's a person who has experienced the harmful effects of pornography and sexual exploitation in some devastating ways. She grew up in Ventura, California, with a young mother who wasn't ready to prioritize her. At a young age, Alia experienced child sexual abuse at the hands of her mother's boyfriend. She went on to experience sex trafficking as a child and ultimately ended up in the porn industry. About 4 years ago, Alia decided to transition away from the commercial sex industry. Today, she's an involved mother, has finished a 4-year degree, and is helping other people who have experienced sexual exploitation. We want these conversations to be educational, uplifting, and hopeful. As we sit down with experts, influencers, activists, and people with personal accounts, we cover a wide variety of topics that may be triggering to some. You can refer to the episode notes for a specific trigger warning. Listener discretion is advised. With that being said, let's jump into the conversation. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Consider Before Consuming. How are you doing today?
Pretty good.
How's California?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Really?
As opposed to the high of 9 they've had this week in Chicago. Yeah, it's gorgeous here. It's like 65 degrees and sunny.
Quite the change of scenery.
Yeah, exactly.
I have to ask, what took you from Chicago to California?
So I'm from California, and I have a daughter that lives here with her dad.
Cool. Mm-hmm. How old is your daughter?
She's 5.
Nice. That's such a cool age.
Yeah, she's great.
Is that your only one?
No, I have an 11-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Nice. We have 3 kids as well, so I can relate to the busyness.
Yeah, they're crazy, but they're great.
For sure. Well, it's nice to get to know you a little bit. The first question I have to ask, because this is kind of our first time really talking to each other, and I don't know even how to pronounce your name yet.
Alia.
That's a pretty name. Where does that come from? Because it's so unique. I've never seen it before.
It was from the book Dune. Do you remember that book? They made it into a movie.
No, I don't.
Yeah, I think there's a movie coming out soon. It's like a science fiction book that was really big in the late 80s.
Oh, cool.
So,
Well, a couple things to help us better understand you as an individual. Would you share with us once again where you're from, something that makes you happy, and something that you're proud of?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from Ventura, California. It's a little beach town just north of Malibu, south of Santa Barbara. Something that makes me happy, these days it's just about everything. I'm just super grateful to just be able to live the life that I do, and anytime that I get to just be a part of my life now and get to be a part of the amazing things that I get to do, like those are the things that really bring me a lot of joy. But I'm also a big reader. I watch a lot of Netflix. Netflix makes me happy. Food, I'm a big foodie. And then something that I'm proud of is probably the work that I've gotten to do in the last few years, and just bring awareness to a lot of things that I thought would end up being shame that I would take with me for the rest of my life, that have turned around to be these things that are just awesome testimonies.
That's so cool. Well, I'm interested to know how you came to where you're at today, or how you transitioned into being more public.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there are times that I feel a lot of uncomfortability sharing my story, and there are times where that does like rear its head, and I have to put it back down and remind myself of, what the truth is, and that this isn't just my story, this is everyone's story. Um, and there was a shift for me that happened about 6 months after I left the industry, where I thought, at that time I was thinking like, this is my baggage, this is my um shame that I'm gonna have to keep hidden. People aren't gonna want to hear what I have to say. But I realized at some point that that was really my old thinking that was carrying on into my life, that was my old shame, and that uh, if given a platform, I was always going to say yes. As long as I thought about it and thought like this is a healthy way to use my voice, I was going to say yes. And as soon as I made that decision, things just started coming out of the woodwork. I had people who wanted to interview me, people who wanted to be a part of telling my story, and I just thought like, wow, this is a gift. This is something that doesn't just affect me. This is something that's affecting so many people's lives, and I have a unique ability to speak into that. So it's been really cool to see like the way that willingness has carried on over the last few years, and the things that have gotten to kind of come out of that.
Yeah. It makes me think of the concept of like when you give, you get, right? And it
Right.
was almost like you're giving away some of these stories and experiences to help other people, and you're getting these opportunities, which we're so grateful for.
Yeah, and I'll tell you another big piece of that is I only know a couple of people who have been able to leave the industry and live successful lives. I think we know that that's not the case for most people. And the couple of people that I do know have all chosen to do that. They've all chosen to turn around and tell their stories and give back and use the experiences that they have to help other people who are struggling, or just to use it as like advocacy and education and information. So they were really inspiring to me as well.
That's cool. Kind of just that shows the importance of like owning your story, right?
Yeah,
That's cool.
exactly.
That's inspiring. That's really cool. Well, like you said, it's not easy. Even though you've done this for a long time, you've used platforms to speak about the harmful effects of pornography and sexual exploitation. And even though you've had those experiences, it's still not easy. And so we just want to acknowledge that up front. And as we go through the conversation, just know that if there's questions you'd prefer not to answer today, please let me know. We want to publish something that you're proud of. So,
Thank you.
can we dive into your personal account a little bit?
Yeah, let's do it.
I guess the first question to open it up would be, when did you begin experiencing some of the harmful effects of pornography or sexual exploitation?
hmm so that happened for me very early. I was sexually abused pretty early, starting about 4 years old, and uh, that my abuse included pornography, both like of taking pictures of myself at that age, or my abuser taking pictures of me, and then also of pornography being utilized in that abuse as a way to um, just introduce sexuality, I guess, into my life at that age by that person. And so that would be where I would pinpoint the beginning of that the introduction into, sexual exploitation and pornography.
And at 4 years old, um, I just can't imagine, because I'm trying to think back to when I was 4, and I have some very faint memories.
Mhm.
And then I think to my kids, and goodness gracious, that is young.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. Have you always known that the abuse happened when you were around that age of 4, or did it take some digging to uncover that?
So I had, because like you're saying, our memories at 4 are so weird. They're hard to look back and be like, "Oh yeah, I remember the time and the date and the length of time." And
Right.
so I remembered I had clips of memories and um feelings that were uncomfortable, but because it was my abuse happened by a boyfriend of my mom, and I knew the time when they were together, when I was, trying to really formulate when was this, which was pretty young because it was something that had still stayed with me that I did remember did happen. I was probably 10 or 11, maybe 12 when I started formulating in my mind, like, when was this? And I was able to, kind of pinpoint the age because of the person that she was with at that time. And but there are things that I don't remember. I had a friend asking me recently, like, how long did this go on? And I can't, those kinds of things I can't remember. I can't remember. I know that it was ongoing. I know that it was repeated, but I can't remember if it was. Uh, a few months or a couple of years, because that time period um, in our brains at that age is just so mushy.
Yeah, and I also think that it's not only just based off age, but maybe the experiences were so traumatizing that sometimes I think that can be almost like a coping mechanism of some sort,
hmm
right?
Yeah, it's definitely a way that our brains protect us, and there's there's a lot of gratitude in for me in that um, man, I don't have to look back and be able to play it back like a movie because that could
Right,
be awful.
right. Have you noticed that as you've spoken about it more, that you've had more memories come about or more clarification as to
No,
what happened?
um, not not necessarily as I've spoken about it more. I've gone through a lot of therapy and a lot of professional assistance to get over those kinds of traumatic issues. And absolutely, in those situations with a therapist, there were things that came back. And I did all that before I decided to speak publicly uh, about my abuse and about my experience in pornography. So I'm grateful that I got all of those things out there in that safe place and with a safe person and with people who knew how to handle that before speaking about it more.
Yeah, cool. That's really cool that you took the time to go to therapy and really take care of yourself. That's really,
Yeah.
really important. And we're grateful because you're here with us today.
Yeah,
And who
me
knows if
too.
you would have been without all that therapy and self improvement.
Exactly.
Can you go back to how your, I guess, how pornography, because pornography played a role in your abuse and how your
hmm
sexual abuse affected you as an individual early on
hmm
in your life?
Yeah, and there's another key point in that I think was really important to my development, and that was that my mom was actually um, a an adult print model, um, and so I had another set of exposure to pornographic images because of that. And growing up, my mom she had been a centerfold for one of Larry Flynn's magazines, which was a big print hustler type thing. And she had like a life size print of one of her centerfold photos hanging above her bed. And so that I also, not only was I sexually abused, but I was also raised by somebody that had a really high view of pornography at that point in her life. Things have changed a lot since then. But as like a very young mom, that was something that she idealized as well. So because I was raised in this environment and then coupled with the sexual abuse, those things they spoke into each other. They were messages from two different places that were telling me the same thing. Both the pornographic images that I was seeing of my mother and the way that she carried herself, and the way that she spoke so highly of her experiences, along with my abuser who was telling me that this is what sexuality is, this is what sexual touch is, what uh, love looks like. Specifically, like forced sexual touch is what love looks like, and that these women in these magazines, or um, in the case of the sexual abuse that I was seeing, these underage girls that I was seeing in photographs and things like that, that this is really where someone would peak in life, that these were good things, these were things that were um, to be to be idolized and idealized. And so obviously that really affected my view of pornography in general, of the men and women who were in pornography, and of its place in my life and of my purpose in the world. And I definitely carried that with me into, preteen, adolescent, and then young adulthood.
Wow.
Does that answer that
Absolutely.
question?
Yeah, that's, I think, man, I just want to acknowledge how unique I mean, I know that your experience is more common than we might think,
Hmm.
but I just find it so interesting that your mom was also part of the porn industry
Hmm.
and that you grew up in that. That's really interesting to me, and it's interesting to learn how that negatively affected you. What
Hmm.
were your coping mechanisms to deal with the hurt and the traumas and maybe the neglect as well that you experienced as a kid?
Yeah. Early on, I'd say my first coping mechanism was attention. As a young kid, I didn't get, like you were saying, there was some neglect, and again, I just want to say that my relationship with my mom now is very, very different, and I'm super grateful for that. She's
Good.
one of my biggest champions
That's awesome.
um, now, but that was not the case until really not that long ago, maybe 7 years ago. And but my first coping mechanism was to find that attention that I wasn't getting at home, or that I was getting too much of at home in the case of the sexual abuse, in other places. So I turned into someone that, I was trying hard at every single thing that I would do, and yet it was never enough. And so then I would give up, and I would try hard again, and I would give up, and I would try hard again um, till I found pieces of my life that I could control. So it was an aspect of looking for the attention, looking for the control, and then diving into those things that gave me that. And so early on, one of those things that gave me that was food. I was always a really small person. Not only had I like seen the idealized image of what it was meant to be a woman as being really thin, from my mom and from the pornography that I was exposed to, but also just from my natural body type, I was a smaller person, and I got a lot of praise for that growing up. And that was one piece of my life that I felt like, okay, this is something that I don't feel shame about. And so that became that an eating disorder grew out of that, and that became something that I definitely used to cope. It gave me a lot of control when my life seemed anything but controlled. And it gave me something that I could feel pride in, and that I carried that with me for, gosh, like 15 years. And then as I got older, um, sex became a huge piece of uh, that coping mechanism for me as well. There was uh, a lot of alcohol abuse and a lot of relationships that were really unhealthy that I tried to use to cope. And it was just a lot of trying to find, like, um, what things make me feel better? What can I do that makes me feel better? And there's so many things in life that works for a short period of time,
Right, that
and then
instant
and
better.
then they don't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That instant gratification. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Did
exactly.
did you ever turn to pornography consumption?
Um, Not as an adult. As a young kid, I had started to look um, at pornography on my own. I don't believe it was necessarily as a coping mechanism. Um, when I turned to looking at pornography, it was as a comparison tool. Uh, I used that to be like, where am I at with my physicalness, with my physicality? What does my body look like? And in what ways am I supposed to look beautiful? So for me, when I looked at pornography, um, starting at like 11, 12, it was almost like my way of doing research. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I know that this is what people are supposed to look like. This is what beauty looks like. This is what the ideal woman looks like, and the way that she behaves, and the way that she acts. And so I'm gonna, just copy that, and I'm gonna just try and mirror that in the rest of my life.
So would you say that you were turning to it as almost like sex education?
Yeah, absolutely. As sex education and as life education, because the information that I had been given was that this was the best thing. These were the best people. These were people that I should want to be like. And so I wasn't given information that was like, this is just them at work, or this is them, acting as if for the consumer. This was my information was like, this is the best piece of life.
Yeah. Hmm. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, going to your abuse, and like we've talked about, sometimes, when you're especially at a young age, that abuse can seem like a blur, right?
Hmm.
And it's hard to remember all those details, and it's hard to even identify if abuse, like, it's hard to identify that abuse is abuse
Hmm.
sometimes.
Hmm.
And they say name it to tame it. So I'm curious to know, when were you able to identify your abuse as abuse?
Um, that's something that's ongoing for me because, as I'm sure we'll get into, there was more abuse that happened as I went into my teenage and even adult years. Um, And that was a really difficult piece for me to be able to identify that um, as abuse. I mean, obviously, at 4, I didn't have words for sexual abuse or molestation or rape or anything like that. I didn't have those words. And so the first time I had ever heard about sexual abuse, I think I was like 10. And a friend of mine was talking about, I don't remember, maybe she had just learned the word. I can't remember exactly how it came up, but I remember thinking like that's what happened to me. And I had already known that those things happened. I didn't, have any sort of block in my mind that completely protected me from the knowledge that it had happened, but I just didn't have a way to frame it. Um, and so I remember when that happened to me, but I didn't tell people for probably another 5 years after that. And I didn't tell my family until only a few years ago. And so each time that I've gotten to claim it in a new way has brought about that like taming effect. It has brought about this like feeling of transparency. But like you're saying, that's a hard point in our lives when we don't have words for those things. Um and I saw that happen to me over and over again, where I would experience something that maybe had been presented in such a way that it wasn't abuse, that it wasn't until years later when maybe I was talking about the experience with someone else, or I was hearing someone else's experience, that I realized, oh my gosh, what what happened to me? That was what that was. That was abuse, or that was trafficking, or that was assault. And so it's a process.
Right. I think it'd be interesting if you could give us some context or give us your perspective on why it took you years to talk about it. And the reason why I
Hmm.
think it's important to kind of address this, if you will, is because I think for people that are not very familiar with how abuse works and the grooming process
Hmm.
and the aftermath of abuse, I think sometimes the outside perspective that's very oversimplified is like, why didn't you tell sooner?
Hmm.
Right? And so I
Yeah.
just want to give you an opportunity to maybe talk to that a little bit about why was it so challenging to speak about it?
So there's a couple of pieces to that specifically for me. For one, um, again, at that age, like we just said, I didn't really have words for what was
Right.
going on. And I didn't necessarily know that what was going on to me, what was happening to me was wrong. It felt wrong. I didn't like this feeling, but the person that was abusing me was telling me that this was okay. So there's that piece in it also. And then by the time I got old enough to know that this wasn't okay, this person was gone and out of my life. There was still some kinds of feelings of like, I don't really know how to put this into words. I don't, that young preteen. late childhood stage is just confusing. And then there's also like at that age, you don't really understand that this thing that happened to you, even if it was wrong, even if you've gotten to that place where you're like, okay, I was abused, how it's still affecting your life or how it's going to continue to affect your life. And so there's shame that gets brought with that. There's shame from the abuse. There's shame from the fact that you didn't tell anyone, or you, um, you didn't trust people in your life at that time, and not trying to want to upset my mom or my grandparents and bring up something to them that had been years old at that point. Uh, a child's brain especially just doesn't work in that same kind of way that ours do. If somebody grabs your purse on the street, you don't feel any shame about that, and you don't have a problem being, going to the next person and telling them that.
Right.
But as a
That's an
child,
interesting
those
comparison.
yeah, and as a child, those things aren't that's not the same.
Yeah.
Our brains go to protecting our people, and our brains are confused. Our minds are filled not only with what we think is right and wrong, but what our abuser told us was right and wrong. And like I said, my relationship with my mom at that point wasn't at a place where I necessarily trusted her to carry something like that. And I know that fear, that cliche of not being believed. People, say it as a cliche that, that's not a good excuse. Of course, they would believe a child who says that. But I mean, honestly, that's not always true. And I carried that feeling of that I wouldn't be believed with my mom until, gosh, maybe 3 years ago. Even when
Oh,
I had told
wow.
other family members, or I had told other people in my life and worked through it in therapy. I didn't tell my mom about that until about 3 years ago, and I'm lucky that my mom absolutely did believe me and was of huge support and affirmation, and she actually already knew. Um, but that's a burden that people who went through abuse carry around with them for sure.
Right. Thanks for sharing that insight. I know you also experienced you entered at some point in your life, you entered the life of sex trafficking.
Hmm.
And I was wondering if you can talk to that a little bit of how that transition happened and what it looked like
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, so as I kind of touched on when you were asking me about my coping mechanisms, I touched on the fact that I used sex as a coping mechanism, and that started for me around 12 or 13. Um, I had, through my abuse and through my understandings of sexuality, I had gotten um, the idea that sex was uh, the end all be all. It could cure all things. It could fix all things, and so I started trying that around 12 or 13, as I would feel uncomfortable, or I would feel anxious, and a lot of the things I was feeling were probably effects from the sexual abuse that I had gone through, and
Of course.
the anxiety there, and just the kind of recklessness, and um, feeling like my life wasn't valuable, my life wasn't sacred, and so I'm aging myself here, but this was in like MySpace era,
Yeah.
um, and so MySpace was a place that I turned in order to just like I was a completely reckless preteen teenager. And I would just go on MySpace in the middle of the night or the middle of the day or whenever, and I would find these guys that were much, much older than me. Like I said, I was probably 12, 13, and I was finding these guys that were in their, late 20s, who would come and pick me up and that I could go hook up with, and then that would drop me back off at home. And so I was doing that pretty regularly. And while I was doing that, I found this one guy. Um, I had done this, quite a few times before, and I just thought that at this age, I thought like I'm really street smart. I had grown up in kind of a rough area from a rough family, and um, I thought that I could handle myself. And we want to talk about the grooming process. Like this man was in his late 20s. I think he was about 28 at the time, and he he really knew how to flip the script on a lot of the things that I was feeling, and promised to be the person that would get me to not feel that way. Because for me, it was always about, how do I not feel this way? How do I not feel this pain? How do I feel like I'm alive? And he really knew how to rewrite that in a way that was dependent on him. So at this time, it was about 13, 14, and I was, um, thought that I was in love. And there's this technique that people in the life of sex trafficking know very well, and it's called boyfriending. And so it's where someone who plans to be a pimp or is a pimp will gain the confidence of a girl by being in a relationship with her, and then eventually that relationship requires more than just relationship. In order to stay in that relationship, in order to hold your own in that relationship, asked to uh, you're asked to have sex with X, Y, and Z people, in order to hold your value in that relationship still. And because that bond has already been formed in the time before then, so many girls um, go ahead and go through with that. And so that's what happened to me. And he really knew how to groom me. He knew how to bring in the idea of prostitution. Um, it's crazy. Like I said, I'm still unfolding things and still realizing pieces of this, even now. This is about 15 years ago that this started happening. And even just in preparation for this podcast, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I was talking to her about the situation and this relationship with this guy. And I'm telling her, like, oh, but he had his own stuff, and I don't hold anything against him, and he was doing this on his own, and he was sleeping with women for money in order to provide for himself and to provide for me. And I'm saying this to her, and I'm looking at her, and she's just staring at me like, she'll get there, she'll get there. And that's when I realized, like, it just, just a couple weeks ago, oh my gosh, that's that's not what happened. Like, that was something that he was telling me in order for me to feel comfortable with what he was gonna be asking me to do
Interesting.
a few weeks from then. And so he knew how to do that, and I fell into that. And so at that point, my life looked like, I was about 14, 15, and my life looked like leaving my home. I would run away from home for as long as I could without getting caught, and I would go be with him. And in the time that I was with him, he would take me to hotels and take me to people's homes and drop me off. And my experience wasn't a violent one, which was an issue for me naming it, like you said, moving on later. And my experience was one where I thought that I was doing this consensually because my boyfriend had asked me to do this. Um, Especially at that age, 14 is that age of, like, I'm an adult.
Right. That
I know what I'm
mentality.
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I didn't understand that, like, my mind was still able to be molded and groomed, and just kinda, like, change to whatever someone else would want at that time.
Right. And going to like the legal definition of what sex trafficking is in the United
Mhm.
States, I think a simple way to put it is that it's a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person is under the age of 18.
Right.
So you were under the age of 18,
Mhm.
but I'm wondering, at what point did you start to realize that you were in the life of sex trafficking?
Um, so that's another interesting point, because, I actually didn't realize that as sex trafficking until, I was probably 24. I had known that I had worked in prostitution when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, moving on into 18. Um, but I didn't understand that I was the kind of person that could be trafficked. I didn't understand that piece of, like, under 18. I didn't understand that piece of coercion, because that was absolutely uh, a huge part of it, like that grooming process, that um, kind of mind bending that happens, that manipulation that happens was definitely coercion for me. And so I I had to have someone else tell me like what happened to you, what was going on with you was not consensual. Um, and once I started to put those pieces together, that was when I was able um, to see that. So it wasn't until I was actually out of the situation, and that trauma bond that uh, survivors of trafficking and of their traffickers have is really hard to break, and it can rewrite what actually happened into something that's um, much more digestible in the survivor's mind and in their spirit. You don't want to see somebody that you cared about as being capable of doing something like that to you. You want to see yourself as a person who had choice and as a person who entered into something willingly. And so
Yeah.
that was definitely my situation.
Hmm. One time I heard that the memory, like our memories as humans, is kind of like a Wikipedia page where
Hmm.
people can go in and
Hmm.
kind of alter it and influence it, right?
Yeah. Oh,
So,
that's good.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I think a lot of victims and survivors of sex trafficking, that's what's happening, is that grooming process like you're talking about.
Hmm.
I think, actually, one question I have is, did you know what sex trafficking was when you found out? Like, as you were explaining these situations to people or to that person, whoever it was, whatever the situation was,
Hmm.
and that person helped you understand that wasn't prostitution. That, by definition, was sex trafficking. Had you
Hmm.
heard about sex trafficking? Did you know what it was?
So I had heard of sex trafficking, and we're gonna get to this as well, from working in strip clubs. There's in California law, I don't know if it's US law or California law, but there's a law that strip clubs have to have, like, this big poster in their dressing rooms in their office that defines sex trafficking.
Okay.
And so that was where I had first heard of it from, but I had still had this image that I think, like a lot of people still do, that sex trafficking is children that are stolen, or people that are brought here from other countries and held in like a dungeon. And so the truth of what does this really look like domestically, and who are the 99% and not the 1%, um, came out for me over time as I realized, like, oh gosh, I am in that 99% of what sex trafficking survivors look like. And it still unfolded for years after that, as I realized that other pieces of my story that I would end up in, or that I had been in, were either trafficking or abuse.
Yeah. And like you said, I think that it's common human nature to want to be in control of our situation and in
Hmm.
control of ourselves. Can you talk to a little bit about how difficult it was to accept that? To accept that, yes, you were a victim and now a survivor of sex trafficking. Was that like a tough pill to swallow,
Um,
or not too difficult for you?
it was it was um, it was difficult. It wasn't life shattering.
Yeah.
It was definitely something that I would lay there and just think like, "Wow, how did I miss this?" But at the same time, my life was already so chaotic, and when I did find out, that I had other things on my mind and other things that I had to handle, and other things that took much more of my energy, um, but a big piece of what was so traumatic was that trauma bond that I had formed with the person who had trafficked me, and realizing, wow, I had really been manipulated and duped. It wasn't necessarily the situation, it was that bond was shattered, and that um, idealized thing that I had in my mind of who this guy was and how much he had looked out for me and had been really the only person that understood me, and all of those things that I had thought, because he had, formed my thinking to think those things. Uh, that was what really bothered me, and that was what was definitely more shattering.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Mhm.
At what point did you transition into stripping?
So I got out of a when I was 17, I went out of state. My family sent me um, to like a treatment center for kids who were having a lot of trouble, that were having a lot of trauma, that were um, kind of out of control. Because, like I said, at that point, my stuff with my trafficker started when I was 14, but it didn't end um, until after I was an adult. So I was running off and disappearing for as long as I could, weeks at a time at some points. And so my family wanted to put me somewhere safe. And they did their best. The place that they picked probably wouldn't be the place that I would pick for someone, but it was what was available at that point. And so I turned 18 there, and when I came back from turning 18, I looked at my trafficker again. I got a hold of him, um, and I explained to him I'm back. Like I need you. I need to be away from my family, and I'm 18 now, and nobody can put me anywhere, and nobody can stop me. And at this point, it's like, and also no one can protect you.
Yeah, that's
But
true. The other side of that.
and so 4 days after I turned 18 and had gotten back, he picked me up, and I just kind of assumed that things would go back to the way they always had been. But this time, he told me, like, hey, things are going to be a little different. And why don't you start working in the strip club? And he bought me some shoes and took me over to the club and dropped me off. And that was my first experience. And again, in preparation for this interview, I was talking this through with a friend, and she was like, "Wasn't that scary? Wasn't that hard? Weren't you uncomfortable?" And it's so funny, like when your mind has been shaped to listen to a certain type of person for your whole life, and to just be told what you're supposed to do, especially when it comes to sex and sex work and things. This was like, oh, this fit right into my narrative. Like, okay, yeah, drop me off there, and I'll do the best that I can do. And it was just the next, like, step on that stairway that I was already on.
Yeah. That's interesting. And then how many years did you spend stripping?
So I worked off and on in the strip club from 18 to 27. So nine years off and on.
So 9 years. That's quite a bit of time.
Yep,
What
it was
is
a
the
long time.
average, would you say, according to kind of your perspective, your knowledge, experience, what is the average duration of someone that works in that industry?
I would say that at the time that I left, when I was able to say, like, I've been working in clubs for 9 years, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
That wasn't by any sense like the average. Honestly, I think it could be anywhere from just like a few months turnaround. There's so many girls that come in, and um, they end up deciding this is not necessarily a safe place, and not for me, and not what TV tells us it's going to be like, and then leave to maybe a couple of years. Um, but the thing with strip clubs is it's something that I think people repeatedly go back to. So they'll work for a few months here, and then they'll stop, and they'll get try and get life together, and work another job, and then they'll end up coming back. So that's a hard judge of, like, what's the average time.
Yeah.
But there aren't many women over 30 in a strip club. So there's that gives you a short window.
Yeah. Was your trafficker in control during your entire 9 years working in the strip club?
Uh, No. So my situation with my trafficker pretty much ended after that. I ended up getting pregnant by someone else that I met, and leaving the strip club, and not really having contact with him uh, after that. And so my my trafficking situation, at least from the perspective of what it had been when I was being trafficked by that specific person, ended at about that time.
Okay. Around the age of like 18 or 19 or so.
Yeah, yeah.
Gotcha. And speaking to, you mentioned how people will leave the industry and then return and then leave and return, or go try a new job and then return. Do you think that it could be because of lack of options? Is that
Oh,
why they could be returning?
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I think there's a lot of pieces to it. Lack of options is going to be, um, I mean, absolutely one of the top ones, and um, especially when you live in somewhere like Southern California, where cost of living is just out of control, and you have to put food on the table and be able to pay your rent and all of those things, and I mean, there's not a lot of jobs out there, especially for I while there are a few of them, I don't know a lot of women who entered into commercial sex who, um, had stable home lives, who had not undergone abuse, and who had, you know, any sort of marketable skills to get a job that could really provide a life.
Yeah.
Um, and again, that's not to say that there aren't those exceptions out there. There are, but it's not the majority. Um, and many of the women that I worked with had a um, similar experiences to what I had had growing up.
Yeah. This is a challenging question, so I just want to acknowledge that difficulty there. But if you had to guess based on your experience,
Mhm,
if you had to put a percentage to
mhm.
how many people in the industry were abused, or, yeah, I guess experienced childhood abuse, sexual abuse, what percentage would that be? Do you know,
Oh,
or is that just too
uh,
challenging? Do you not talk enough
there.
about that?
I mean, there are actual percentages out there from interviews that people have done with, um, like actual like academic studies that people have
Yeah.
done, and it's high. I
I
want to
looked at
say
one.
that.
I thought it was like 60 to 90% is what the study I looked
Yeah.
at. Is that you think that's
Yes,
probably correct?
absolutely. Yeah, I would have said probably about 80.
Okay.
And the other 20, honestly, some of them are probably part of that 20 that wouldn't say they've been abused. I bet you a big chunk of that is from not being able to put a name to the abuse that happened, or not understanding it as abuse
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so at what point did you transition into doing pornography?
Mhm. So I transitioned there um, after my daughter was born. I had my daughter when I was 19, and I went right back into working in strip clubs. I was um, obviously a really young mom. I hadn't finished high school, didn't have a whole lot of other options, um, was in a very abusive relationship. And so I started working back in the strip clubs, and there was a customer there um, that would always come in, and he would talk to us. He would talk to all of us. He would spend a lot of money. So he was the kind of person that wanted to spend more time with. And I started getting fed the line of like, "You're so beautiful. Like, why don't you do modeling? That I know people that can get you out of here. You don't have to come in here. You can do everything in the daytime. And there's lots of people with kids, I heard, and let me give you this girl's number." And so he gave me the phone number for uh, a woman to call to talk about modeling, right? And so I called her, and she was pretty upfront for me. She's like, "Yeah, this is a lot of modeling, but essentially it's porn. And these are the kinds of things you're going to be doing." And she's like, "You can make your own hours. You can say no to anything that you don't want to do. You can always call us if you feel uncomfortable. You don't ever have to do a shoot with people that you don't want to do a shoot with. And if you ever just feel uncomfortable, you call us and you leave." And so, because this was a girl that I was talking to, she was a girl, maybe a little bit older than me. She's like 20, 23, 24. She had been doing porn, and she was working for this management company. I trusted her. I trusted her experience. She had two little kids, and so I felt like this is not a person um, that's gonna, you know,
Exploit.
exploit me. Yeah, exactly. This is somebody I can relate to. And so at that point, with my trust in her, I started doing porn then. I think I was about almost 20.
You said that you also stripped until you were 29, so you were doing this.
27.
27, okay.
Yeah.
And can you talk to a little bit more about how it was being in the industry, like the porn industry?
hmm
How it felt maybe going to your first experience. So you say, okay, this individual's not going to exploit me. She's building trust, right?
hmm
It could be said that maybe she was grooming you,
hmm
because I would imagine she was probably getting paid to get you to gigs, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the way that a management company works is they take a percentage of your income. So obviously, if you're doing shoots, they're getting paid. And so, um, my first experience um, was wildly uncomfortable, to put it to put it just flatly. And I drove down to like Santa Monica area, and there's like, there's solo shoots and there's girl shoots and there's girl boy shoots and all of those things. And my first shoot was a solo shoot, and so it was just going to be me. And I drove down there, and it was like in someone's home, which um, I I had kind of had an image of things being a lot more put together, I
Yeah,
guess is how I would
like
have
on
put
a
it.
set of some sort.
Yeah, exactly. And I have done shoots that were like that as well, but that wasn't what this specific one was. And um so it was at this person's home, and he's like an kind of an old, gross dude, like not somebody that I would have wanted to like be naked in front of or be sexual in front of, on
Right.
my own time. Um and it was just a really uncomfortable experience, and I just felt like very gross and very just like my skin was crawling the whole time. And even though my manager, when I had come and talked to them and I had signed my contract, um, which is a contract, like there's no joke. If you sign a contract for pornography, like that's a legal binding document that you can't turn away from without lawyers. And so I had signed a contract to do X amount of shoots and take home X amount of money. And even though when I had done that, my managers had told me, if you're ever uncomfortable, if you ever don't feel safe, you call us and we have you. We're here for you. We're for you. All things that I'll tell you I hadn't really heard ever before in my life. Um, and so we're very appealing. Even though I had just heard those things from them, when I texted them and said, like, hey, I'm feeling kind of weird. Could you like come be with me while I'm here? Or could you whatever? Um, I just didn't even get a response back.
Oh, wow.
Um, so right from right from off the bat, like they were reneging on their side of the safety that they had promised, of the um, comfort that the industry had promised me. But again, because of my life experiences before then, this really fit in well. This wasn't like, oh, and I am uncomfortable and this is not what it said it was going to be, so I'm going to leave this industry and I'm never coming back.
Yeah,
This was another just like turning up the temperature a little bit on that like boiling pot that I was already in.
right.
Um,
I was
so
actually
yeah,
going to
that
ask
was.
that because I think I like the example you just used about the boiling pot.
Mhm.
Because are you talking about the frog example?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that's an interesting analogy, because one of the thoughts I had is I wonder if they sent you to a solo shoot as your first shoot as part of that turning up the heat a little bit.
Mhm.
Do you think that's probably true?
Absolutely. My shoots went from solo shoots to girl shoots to girl boy shoots. So I would think that that would definitely be. And
Yeah, that
again,
makes sense.
that was that. And the more um, uncomfortable to shoot with whatever they were asking me to do physically, or whether they were going to be shoots that were like simulating rape, things like that. Those were never my shoots off the bat. Those were shoots that came um, further along in my career.
Yeah. Well, one thing you mentioned is you said that in your contract they had you sign that there was a couple of details. You said X amount of shoots and X amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you, and once again, I just want to acknowledge, or I guess restate, that if you don't want to answer this question, it's totally okay. The question I have is, how much did you make in that first contract? And I think the reason why I want to ask this question, I think that it's going to be eye-opening. And I think if you made a lot of money and you've left the industry, then that shows like, well, why did she leave the industry if she made a lot of money? And then the other side of that, if you didn't make much money, then it's like, man, well, maybe this isn't, because a lot of people say there's money in pornography. So I think either way, it can be kind of something that we should consider as a world. So do you feel comfortable answering that question?
Yeah. So my first contract, which would have been in, I think, 2011, it was $5,000 a month. So it was not a lot. But for me at that time, that seemed like a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'd just turned 20. I had never had a job outside of sex industry in one way or another. By the time I left the industry, I was making, a little more than double that a month. But again, not all of that was things that I was taking home. I was in like multiple abusive relationships where I was never in control of my money. No, I didn't leave like one of my mentors who left the industry, left making, she was making $20,000 a month when she left, and left it to take a job that was paying her $8.75 an hour.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but yeah, but that first contract was $5,000 a month.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to how being in the porn industry affected you as an individual in regards to your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health?
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. Like I said before, I was already struggling with an eating disorder, and the industry definitely, turned the knob up on that one as well. There was a lot of criticism if I was bloated, or I had, a scrape on my leg, even just like normal things um, that we have happen to our bodies were really looked down on at that point. And so there was a lot of pressure um, to constantly be perfect and constantly have perfect looking physique, and that took a toll on me, emotionally and physically. Obviously, I was a very like unhealthy person at one point. My hair was almost falling out because I was restricting my diet so much in order to go to a certain standard so that I could do these certain shoots that I was being booked for. And um, on top of that, it was just kind of a mind trip. Um, there were so many shoots that I would go to where I was so uncomfortable. Um, I would maybe even, want to leave crying, and I would have to shut off my brain and like kind of do this thing that this like disassociative thing in order to get through it. And then yet after the shoot, everyone would just be congratulating me and just praising me, and um, taking us out to eat afterwards, and like forming this, little like bond with us, and that um, it was really a trip of like, which one of these feelings is real? Like, these feelings can't coexist. I can't feel this way during a shoot and then feel this way afterwards.
Right.
Um, Yeah, so it was leading to a lot of just depression and anxiety, and um, yeah, it was a mess.
Yeah.
It was a mess. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that insight. Um, I'm curious if, and this is a very sensitive question, but I'm curious if you ever experienced suicide ideation.
Hmm.
And once again, if you don't
Yeah,
want to talk to that, then that's okay.
yeah, definitely. I was absolutely suicidal throughout most of my time um, in the industry, and I'm my baseline personality is an optimist. I am just kind of like a happy and bubbly and outgoing person in general, and so for me to be like really, really low, um, is not normal for me. And there were periods of time that were um, very, very dark where I would fantasize about suicide, especially at the very end of my time in the industry. It became a fantasy. It became a coping mechanism. Thinking about killing myself was a way that I felt relief. Um, and that's the place in my head that I would go in order to escape what I was feeling.
That makes sense. Did, throughout your time in pornography, did you ever experience a healthy relationship?
No. Um, no, we like to say that my picker was way off. I'm sure you've heard that term before,
I
and
haven't. What is?
no, the picker, like the people that you pick,
Yeah.
your picker, your relationship
Yeah.
picker.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I my picker was way off, and even for people who might have been somebody that I could have had a healthy relationship for, I was such an unhealthy person because of what my interpretation of the world was, that I wasn't able to connect with somebody who was a healthy person. I wasn't able to have a relationship with somebody who was functioning and like, again, use the word just healthy. I wasn't able to have a relationship with them because I was just such a mess. Um, so because of that, I was never able to have a healthy relationship. Even in the relationships I had that were maybe borderline okay, I didn't understand the boundaries in sexuality because of my experiences growing up, and then my experiences in porn. I didn't understand how to say um, like no to people when it came to sex. So that led me, to cheat on multiple relationships and be unfaithful. Because I had never been given the opportunity to say no to sexual contact,
Yeah.
um, both in my personal life as a child and then again in my professional life as an adult. So that translated into my relationships as well.
Yeah. Did you consume pornography on a personal level throughout these years as well?
No, I didn't. There were times that it was brought into my relationship where we as a couple would consume pornography during sex or during um, some kind of intimate moment.
Right.
Um,
What's your
and
perspective
yeah,
on that?
yeah. I'm trying to think of how to put this into words. Um, I mean, we know that pornography is it's not real life. And I know that on a on a very personal level. Like this is not what people look like when they go home. These are not what people behave like when they go home. This is this one moment that is meant to be the most highly sexualized thing possible, and it's not an accurate representation of what sex is supposed to look like or what relationships are supposed to look like. And so when I was inviting those things um, into my relationships, I was inviting um, the unrealistic. I was inviting like failure, essentially, and expectations that just were not anything that could have been uh, ever fulfilled.
Right. That makes sense. Do you have a rock bottom moment that you can remember?
Yeah. So, in the last 6 months of working in the industry, I got into a relationship um, that was very similar to the trafficking relationship that I had been in as a teenager. Um, Throughout my time in porn, I was also stripping and escorting, and I had this feeling that I had been in control. Um, I had felt like I was in control of my money, even if I necessarily wasn't. I felt like I was, reclaiming the things that had happened to me, and I really thought that working in porn and working in commercial sex was working for me. And I met this person who um, who kind of flipped my script a little bit. And instead of being the one who was making the decisions in the producers that I would work with and the companies that I would shoot for, um, he started setting up shoots for me outside of those things. Um, I would get in the car to go with him somewhere, and he would tell me like, "Oh, we're not going there. You have a shoot, or you have a customer, or you have something like that." And so all of the control that I had made myself believe that I had was gone. Um, At one point, he got really upset with me and dropped me off in an agricultural district here in Southern California, a couple miles away from anywhere. No shoes. I was in like booty shorts and tank top, or booty shorts and sports bra. Yeah, no shoes, no phone, no purse. At this time in my life, I had had a lot of really expensive things. I had really expensive purses. I wore a lot of diamonds. I had like brand new iPhone and Apple Watch and all of these things that, um, really expensive shoes, these things that had made me feel like I had my life together. And at that point, when he dropped me off, it was kind of like this mirror that I was given. Um, like, no, girl, this is what you have. Uh, this is what you really are left with when it's just you. And so that was my rock bottom, was being there in that area.
I got the
Yeah.
chills as you explained that, because when you said that it was like a mirror, did you mean that in a literal sense, like you were looking at the car window and you saw yourself reflecting back, or was it just a moment of self-reflection?
It was just a moment of self-reflection. It was just like I was finally able to see um, what I really was and how I was really feeling. Um, Once all of the things that I had kind of been using to cover that up and to tell myself that I was okay and that what I was doing was good for me, once those were stripped from me, yeah, I was able to really see who I was as a person, how I was feeling, and the life that I was living um, in actuality, as opposed to like the idealism that I had had in my head.
Yeah. Are you grateful for that rock bottom moment today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, my life from there on, while there have been periods of it that have been really difficult, um, has looked like things that I couldn't have even dreamed of. So yeah, I'm really grateful.
That's cool. One of the things I loved about this conversation so far is one of the very first things you said is that um, I said, "What makes you happy?" And I think your response, if I'm remembering correctly, you said basically everything or
Yeah.
something like that. And I think that comes from a place of gratitude.
Yeah,
So I love that
absolutely.
perspective. And is that how you left the industry? Was it in that moment that you decided to leave the industry?
So that was the last day in the industry. I don't necessarily think that in that moment I was like, and I'm never going back to the industry.
Yeah.
In that moment, I was like, something has to change. Um, and I felt like I really had three paths. I could go back to him and just submit and do whatever it was that he wanted me to do and just live my life like that and really give up, because I had always had dreams of things that I wanted to do. And um like I knew that going back to him and submitting would be submitting to living the rest of my life this way. Um, so that was an option. Suicide was my other option, um, and something that I was extremely thinking about. Um, this wasn't just something that was like on the table and I could take it off the table. This seemed like a great path at this point um, compared to my other options. And then my third option was to try something different. I had known a girl who had left the porn industry in 2012, and I had watched her life change as she healed and um, learned to live life under a different lens. Um, and so I just decided, like, I can't go back. I'm not ready to go back to him. Suicide can always be on the table. Uh, I'm going to try this other option. I'm going to try this third option, and I'm going to try what she did. And I actually went to an aftercare program that we're leaving for women that were leaving sexual exploitation, whether that be pornography, prostitution, strip clubs, or human trafficking. Um, I went to an aftercare center that was, uh, shoot, 9 months to a year long, and so that's how I was able to heal and to get out and stay out of the industry.
Wow. I'm a fan of endurance events.
Okay.
Like, I've done a couple of endurance events in my life, and I kind of look at life as an endurance event.
Hmm.
And when I hear about all of your experiences, I'm like, what a champion. Like,
Hmm.
you are a champion.
Wow, thank you.
We've already talked a lot about the negative impacts that pornography had on you and on your relationships. And at Fight the New Drug, we kind of break it down into three areas. We call them the areas of brain, heart, world,
Hmm.
or individual relationships and the world. And so I can't not ask you this, even though I think it might have already been answered. I want to ask
Hmm.
you again. How do you think that pornography negatively impacts societies and the world at large?
Hmm. Well, again, I think that question was, you know, answered through that way of pornography is something that's not real. It's something we're told is this is the peak of sexual enjoyment. This is the peak of relationships for men and women, and this is what it's supposed to look like, and this is what we're supposed to look like, and it dissatisfies us with each other, both in like the things that we have to bring to each other, the things that we have to do in intimate relationships, whether they're the sexual or non-sexual. I think that pornography really uh, rewrites those those relationships and those expectations of each other um, in a way that is nothing but harmful over something that is completely fake, um, something that is completely ingenuine, is narrating like what is supposed to be the most genuine times in our lives and the most genuine relationships.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for the girl that inspired you to
Yeah,
leave the industry. And I'm
yeah,
also grateful for you because you're inspiring other people. Can we talk to how your life has improved since leaving?
yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, this didn't come without a lot of really hard work. Sometimes when a bone is broken and it heals a certain way incorrectly, the doctors will come in and they'll re-break that bone, in order to get it to set right so that you can function well again. And I definitely had to go through that re-breaking process in an emotional way and able to get out of this. This was not something that was like, I left the industry and now all of my problems are better and I am this super productive and healthy member of society. Not in any sort of sense. There were things that I had carried, since 4, and that were, um, you know, expounded upon and exacerbated by the industry, um, that take continue healing. But I'm about 4 years out now, and the life that I have is unlike my wildest dreams. Um, Not only am I present in my kids' lives and getting to see them grow up and getting to watch them become healthy little humans who are comfortable with who they are. Um, where I was at 10 or 11 is nowhere near where my oldest daughter is at 11. Like, she is so comfortable with who she is and so proud of her accomplishments and so sure of her worth and value
That's
in
cool.
this life that I get to be a part of that, and I get to be a part of molding these people um, in a way that my parents weren't involved in mine. And I'm working. I was always told that I was told I was too smart for my own good, like in an insult kind of a thing, and told to like not act as smart as I was. And I've gotten to put that to use, and I'm finishing a degree that I had always wanted, and looking towards master's programs,
Wow.
and that's insane for me. Like, completing things, I was just not the kind of person that could keep it together for a couple of days, let alone do something that's taken 4 years.
Right.
Um,
That's awesome.
and and then I've also worked for an organization that works for that works to fund safe houses for minors who have become victims of trafficking, and really work towards education and advocacy. And as a person who never had a voice growing up and was never had a voice as a young adult or a teenager, it's amazing to see the way that's been restored, and gone like, here is your voice, and I'm going to use this voice, and I'm going to use um, your experiences in order to change things for other people who are still in the point where they don't have that voice.
Yeah.
And those were dreams I couldn't have even dreamed of, um, that I'm getting to see now. And on top of all of it, I'm just not as broken anymore. There's still pieces
We're all
there, but
broken,
they're
right?
like, exactly. But it's not like a brokenness I'm not having to put the pieces together every day.
Yeah, yeah,
They're
yeah.
like they're glued together a little bit, and when one falls out, I'm able to like manage that one and put it back where it goes, and seal it up until another piece starts to crack, and then I have other people who can come along and help me seal up those cracks, and so it doesn't get ever to the point where it was, where I'm just a bunch of broken pieces on the floor.
Right.
Now it's a brokenness that's manageable. It's a brokenness that's brokenness that's normal, for
Yeah.
lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What is your 4-year degree in?
So I'm getting a degree in human services, so human services pre-counseling. So it's a pretty broad degree on just kind of like psychology, sociology, counseling,
Nice.
a lot of mix of all of those things.
That's awesome. Congratulations on
Yeah,
that.
thank you.
It's really cool. What advice do you have for others who are experiencing sexual exploitation?
Oh gosh. I think first and foremost that it can end today. Like, it can stop now. There doesn't have to be a plan of how to get out. Like, there are so many resources, and so many people that are ready and willing to help you get out of there. Um, Second, that there's no shame in leaving. That was something that I felt like I had failed. Uh, like I had failed this life that had been written for me if I left. It meant admitting defeat. Um, and that's okay. Like, admitting defeat is the best thing that I could have done in my life at that point. And third, that it's just so worth it. Um, and like I've said a bunch of times, my life now is something that I could not have dreamed of. My wildest dreams are nothing compared to the life I'm actually living. Um, and that's not just me. I know I'm not the minority in that. The girls that I do know that have been able to leave the industry and have been able to get healthy are all living lives they never could have imagined. And it doesn't just stop with us. And I'm excited to, hear someday about how um, the next girl left and the next girl is living the most messy, hard, but fully satisfied life that she could have dreamed of.
Yeah,
So,
that's cool. Well, I want to give you the opportunity to have the last word in this
mm.
discussion. Is there one last thing that you would like to share?
Um, this doesn't really sit on anything that we actually discussed, but there's been something that's really been on my heart. Um, just as I've been talking to people like in preparation for this. Um, and I think it's that matter of choice that we have in the industry. And we kind of touched on this a little bit with like where is that coercion um, and the lack of options. And um, I would just really encourage everyone, anybody who gets to listen to this, to just remember that so many of us that came into the industry, while we may have believed that we took that initial choice to enter, um, there are so many nuances to that, and there are so many nuances to choice. We have a choice to breathe every morning. That's something that we could hold our breath for a period of time until we passed out, but we can't. We have this, necessary thing in our body. We have to breathe. We have to intake food, things like that. Those are choices just as much as um, someone who has a need, who fulfills it in the industry in one way or another. Um, and I just want to put that on people's hearts that things aren't always as clear as we make them out to be or as we would hope that they would be. Um, and that it doesn't just go for performers, but for consumers, for producers, for managers, and um, for everyone as well. That there's something that's led to this point, um, and there's something that's led to the point that now we're starting to understand like how are these things bad for us, and how is this contributing to the brokenness in our world. Um, and so, yeah, I'm not sure that that was like a fully formulated thought, but I just wanted to try and have something put out there along that lines to leave you guys with, so you could just be mulling it over and trying to define that choice for ourselves.
I can't thank you enough for showing up day in and day out for the past 4 years or 5 years, you said?
Yeah, it's been about 4 years.
Well, we appreciate you showing up day in and day out so that we can kind of reap the benefits as well, because you're inspiring other people. And so, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
How can pornography impact you, your loved ones, and the world around you? Discover the answer for yourself in our free 3-part documentary series, Brain, Heart, World. In 3 30-minute episodes, this docuseries dives into how pornography impacts individuals, relationships, and society. With witty narration and colorful animation, this age-appropriate series shines a hopeful light on this heavy topic. In each episode, you'll hear from experts who share research on porn's harms, as well as true stories from people who have been impacted personally by pornography. Stream the full series for free, or purchase an affordable screening license at brainheartworld.org.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Consider Before Consuming. Consider Before Consuming is brought to you by Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and non-legislative organization that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. If you want to learn more about today's guest and the conversation we had, you can check out the links included with this episode. Again, big thanks to you for listening to this conversation, As you go about your day, we invite you to increase your self-awareness, look both ways, check your blind spots, and consider before consuming.